All right, I'm sitting here talking with Karl Rove, who I've never met in person. I don't mean this condescendingly. You're a Texan, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
you're part of the group that says, I wasn't born there, but got there as soon as I could.
Yeah, good. Exactly right. Exactly right.
We're
the worst kind of Texans because we have to compensate for not having been born.
And there's a lot of you now.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people moving to Texas. Austin, Dallas. I was just telling you a story. I met your old boss, George W. Bush. He gave
an old boss.
Your old. Did I say new? Did I say
continuing boss?
I met him. He gave a commencement address at my undergraduate in California at Pepperdine, and it was the end of the year, the commencement address. Yeah. So then I got in my truck and I drove back to Texas because it was summertime. It was time to go home. I get there and my dad says, Governor Bush is going to be at the county courthouse giving a speech, Grayson County, Texas. And I said, oh. So we all went over, my dad, my brother, and I, and saw him again. I had ran up to him in California and met him, said, fellow Texan. Go meet him. I'm saying this is probably 4 or 5 days later, different setting, different state. And I go up to him and he goes, oh yeah, Logan, it's that guy we met out in California who's wearing the boots. He remembered me.
Oh, I can top that. He's got his mind is wired in a weird way.
Okay.
So this had to be like early 98, I guess. He's getting ready to run for re-election, but he's thinking about the presidency. And there's a guy from Michigan who had invented the sunroof and made lots of money.
Okay.
And he bought a ranch in the panhandle of Texas. And he said, why don't you come up and go quail hunting, and I'll bring down all my rich Michigan friends. We'll get them to give to your governor's campaign, and it'll be the sort of nucleus if you decide to run for president. So we go to this little town. No governor had ever visited there. A little county near the western, the eastern edge of the panhandle, next up right up to.
What is this, like Pampa?
Oh, that's a big town. That's a big town, and 600 people. 300 people live in the town, and so the town fathers find out we're coming up there. So they said, would the governor come? No governor's ever been to our county. Would he have we'd like to have a pancake breakfast at the school, which is K through 12. And so we show up, and we're not going to go hunting because there are like 700 people there. They've gotten the buses from Old Mobedian come over. They had the high school band from Shamrock came up, and it's like the whole place. So big line of people waiting to get into the gymnasium, and the governor's standing there shaking hands. This guy comes up to him and says, "You remember me?" And Bush looks at him and says, "This is 1998." He says, "Yeah, Joe Bill Jones, Levelland, Texas, March 1978. You came to my fundraising event."
Get out of here.
200 and some odd miles away.
20 years and 200 miles away.
Right. And he says, "What you doing over here?" And he says, "Well, after I saw you when I worked for so-and-so, I came over here, and I'm running the ranch over here for him." And the governor says to him, without breaking a beat, "You had 3 kids." And he said, "I got 5 now, Governor. I got 5 now." I can't remember people I met 15 minutes ago, and here he is remembering people like that. And there's the famous story of he's a Deke pledge at Yale, and this is back when they were serious about hazing. So they're hazing the 51 members of his pledge class, and they say, "Name all your pledge brothers, Pledge Bush." And he goes and names all 51 of his pledge brothers. No more hazing. Done.
I want to get into midterm politics in just a moment, but so I was having a conversation back in Dallas with some of my buddies. This is just this week. And we were talking about potential presidential candidates. Right. And one of my friends was saying, no one has ever won. You can tell me if you agree with this proposition, that hasn't been good at retail politics, meaning shaking hands. Right. And look, the thing that was said about Bush is the guy you wanted to have a beer with, right?
Yeah, in his case, a non-alcoholic.
Right. But that quality, they were saying, matters. And we were looking at current candidates. They said, look, if you've ever met Trump in person, he is magnetic and charismatic, and you want to spend more time around Trump. Obama clearly had something around people he was with. I can't speak to Biden. I'm sure you can. But they were looking at the people that could be in the field for 2024 beyond Trump. Right. And they're just saying they were saying X guy, Y guy doesn't have a chance. You have to be able to shake hands and do what you just described. Right. Maybe not to the level that Bush did in that memory recall, but it's still the essential ingredient.
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, there are a lot of people who on paper do. That's one of the things you find out. This is an experience unlike any of them have had before. And the question will be, over the course of the next 8 or 9 months, do a Nikki Haley or a Mike Pompeo or a Mike Pence or a
Ron DeSantis,
a Glenn Youngkin, a Tom Cotton, a Theodore Cruz. How do they do out there on the campaign trail? And it's gonna be a test. But I think a lot of them have the capacity to do that. We'll see who actually has the ability.
So one more thing on this. I was on CNN and I was around Elliot Spitzer on a nightly basis.
Oh my God! My condolences.
Yep. I met.
Gigantic.
I don't know him well, but I've been around Joe Scarborough. The reason I bring these guys up is they're politicians, right? I met President Bush. I've only briefly met President Trump. The point is, it seems to me that every talented politician can look in your eye and make you feel like you matter for some period of time.
Right.
What distinguishes them, in my limited experience, is how long that is true.
Right.
On some of those politicians, I saw the light go out, meaning you're done with me.
Right.
You're ready to move on to whoever's next,
right.
or someone more flashy grabbed your attention. Right. And I saw in your eyes, I saw the light dim.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. And look, the people think it's a gigantic enterprise running for president. But when you start out, you're going to Iowa and you're going to New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina. And your ability to make a connection with people and maintain that connection is critical. It's a gigantic enterprise, but it is, in essence, a series of one-on-one relationships in building support, building an organization, getting people to commit to support you. And it's a very personal thing.
It's crazy that in the age of social media and television, which we've been in the age of television for a long time, that still matters.
Yeah. Well, and look, in some ways, Trump in 2016 was sui generis because he didn't do a lot of glad handing. But he was a celebrity, and people thought they knew him from having seen him on, a Celebrity Apprentice, and they thought they knew who he was. It's going to be interesting this time around because, somebody, if he decides to run, he will be opposed. And the question is he going to do the gigantic rallies, which, have their utility, or is he going to engage in the kind of retail campaigning that will do him some good in some of the early states?
Stay on president for one more then. The stories of Trump's energy are I've experienced watching numerous rallies, and then they say, come down out of the hotel because he hears there's a bunch of people in the lobby to go shake hands, showing up at those weddings that are in his hotels.
Right.
Do you think...
Try the prime rib tonight, Will. It's really good. It's really good. Don't be a loser. Do the prime rib.
Is there a path? But Megyn Kelly had a clip that went viral a few weeks ago where she said there's just no path. There's no path for DeSantis. There's no path for anyone. There is no vulnerability for Trump.
Sure, there's a path. I mean, he's got to be considered the front runner, but no. I mean, think about it.
What is it?
Well, it's somebody who can basically say, appreciate, and they don't say this, but this is the fundamental message. I've got a vision and an optimistic, compelling vision for the future of our country. I treat the former president with respect. I appreciate what he did. But it's time for a younger generation to take leadership, and we want a candidate for the Republican Party who can serve 2 terms.
What about, this was just this weekend. He already started to sort of address the field. He called Ron DeSantis Ron DeSanctimonious. What about when the attacks come? No one, Carl, has been able to survive those attacks, not one politician.
Yeah, but it's been serial. There were 17 people, and he could take them out one at a time. And I'm not certain he's going to be able to do that because I don't think we're going to have 17 people in the field.
Oh, really?
And second of all, I took it as a sign of weakness. Look, he is the former president. I took 2 things out of that speech as a sign of weakness. One is that he went after DeSantis personally and came up with a not particularly effective, diminishing name. But the other thing was that he is pointing to a poll that is a poll of the attendees at CPAC. And he says, 79% love me. 7% from Mike Pence, doing better than I thought. He's the former president, and he's sounding like he's afraid of those people. And frankly, the polls are not that. To take a look. Hold on one second. Reach my pad. I was looking at this after I saw him do that. I was trying to find out where the 79% came from. And take a look at this. This is from Morning Consult.
Mm-hmm.
Which is connected with Politico. Trump 40. This is as of the 31st of October. Trump 49, DeSantis 24, Pence 9, Haley 3, and then everybody else. There's also then a poll in Georgia, 53 DeSantis, 36 Trump. A poll in Nevada, Susquehanna, Trump 41, DeSantis 34.
Are those likely voters, Republican voters?
Those are Republican primary voters.
That's primary voters.
Yeah.
So way different than the CPAC numbers that Trump used.
Yeah. And remember, back in 2007, Rudy Giuliani was leading in the polls. There's virtually no poll in 2007 where Rudy Giuliani isn't ahead of the field, and it obviously ended up being John McCain as the nominee.
One more on this, because I only have so much time with you, and I want to talk about what's on the doorstep, the midterm elections. Yeah. You said it won't be 17 candidates for president.
No.
What do you think it will be?
Well, 6 or 7. Well, it'll be bigger at the beginning and then lesser, because I think what's going to happen is people are going to get in there, figure out if they've got a shot, see if they can maneuver. And then there's also going to be pressure, I think, from a lot of political activists and donors to say, we want somebody who can win. And so I'm writing you a check to help you get going, but I've got a bigger checkbook for the one that I think has got what it takes to win the nomination.
Who do you think will run?
I don't.
Will DeSantis run?
I don't know, but I think so. Because, look, every one of them, think about this. If you don't run for 2024, Ron DeSantis doesn't run in 2024, then he's going to leave the governorship in 2027. And, really, he's going to, I'm sorry, 2026.
He's up this time.
Yeah. So is he going to really say, okay, well, I'm going to forego the next 4 years and hope that I may be in a good position to run? And
they say Chris Christie's the lesson in that, right? You got to strike when your moment is there.
And look, they're all moving around, so they're obviously all thinking about it. I mean, Youngkin, Haley, Tom Cotton, Chris Christie, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo. They've invested a year or two in moving around the country, and I find it hard to believe that they'll all say, "Okay, well, I'm going to cash it in and let him have a shot," because they're getting encouraged. I mean, it's not like people are out there saying, "Hey, I'm just totally for President Trump," and you get out of the field. No, it's just the opposite. People they understand that the country is not going to be well served if we have an 82-year-old and a 78-year-old rerunning what we saw in 2020.
All right, let's do this now. We are on the eve of the midterm elections. You are always inside the numbers, as you just shared with me there on the presidential polling. First, let's start with what you think is going to happen. I mean, I assume you think there's going to be a red wave. The question is how big.
Yeah, well, and the word wave is like, look, I teach political science at UT. We have what was the modern political party sort of emerged in the years between 1818 and 1824. So by 1824, we've got two parties, in essence, the Democrats and the Whigs. And since that, there have only been two first midterm elections in which the White House party gained seats in the House of Representatives. 1934 for the Democrats, 2002 for the Republicans. This is not FDR. This guy can barely string together two sentences. This is not George W. Bush after 9/11 with approval ratings in the 60s. This guy is in the high 30s, low 40s. So we are going to have the Democrats lose seats in the House. Now, the average since, in essence, the 30s has been 28 seats. I don't think it'll be the average. I think it'll be below average. And I think that because something weird happened in 2020. About 1 out of every 5 times when a party loses control of the White House, it's holding the White House, goes into election and loses control. Republicans in 1992, Democrats in 2000. And only in about 1 out of 5 times does it gain seats in the House of Representatives. Almost 4 out of 5 times it loses seats. We lost the White House in 2020 and gained 14 seats in the House. And that's big for that kind of a situation. Generally, it's 1, 6, 9. 14 is pretty big. So it's a 222 to 213 House. I've been saying I think it's going to be 20 to 25. It could be more. But I think that's the most likely outcome. I've been leaning more towards 20 than 25. I'm now leaning more towards 25 than 20. But say it's 20. That gets us to 233 Republicans in the House. That is 3 more than we had when Newt Gingrich is sworn in as Speaker in 1995.
What about in the Senate?
Senate is a different kind of an animal because we only elect a third of the Senate each 2 years, and this is a so-called Class 3. It's Class 1, 2, and 3. This is Class 3. It is the worst class for Republicans. 21 Republicans up, 2 of them in states. 2 of those seats are in states that Joe Biden won, which has become very important in the modern era. Who won your state in the last presidential election? 14 Democrats up. None of them in a state that Donald Trump won. Now, admittedly, 3 of those are in relatively close states, Arizona, 0.3%, Georgia 0.3%, Nevada 2.5%, just under 2.5%, and a third and a fourth one, New Hampshire, which was about 7%. But New Hampshire is a very mercurial, swingy state, and so that could be within reach. But it's very tough. The Republicans had more people up. They had more
on defense. You're describing,
yeah, playing defense, and a couple of seats where they were playing in sort of purple territory, like North Carolina and Florida, and a couple in lean blue, as in the case of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But I think at the end of the day, it ends up being 51-49, 52-48, though it may take until December and a Georgia runoff to settle it. Because, look, the dynamics underlying this election are so strongly for the Republicans. It's economy, inflation, some parts of the country, crime, immigration. The Democrats have been running on threats to democracy and abortion, and those are, while powerful among some elements of the electorate, are not as powerful as what people are feeling every day in their lives when they go to the grocery store, fill up the car, pick up clothes for the kids to go back to school in, and then look at their paycheck and the stack of bills at the end of the month and realize it ain't going as far.
Okay, so Carl, I just listened to everything you had to say, and I'm going to try to recharacterize it, and you can correct me at the end of this if you think I've mischaracterized what you had to say. But you predicted 51-52 in the Senate. What I would say is that is an optimistic but not overly optimistic prediction compared to things that I've heard in other places.
And very narrow.
You also predicted on the low end of Republican gains in the House.
Right.
Now, you made those, I will call them modest predictions, in the wake of, as you mentioned, terrible messaging and macroeconomic and macro societal issues moving for Democrats, moving away from Democrats and towards Republicans. And yet you stay modest. You also give that prediction and you put it into historical context. You told me that the number I'm giving you is historically average to below average. So in other words, what we've seen happen over a 100-year cycle, if it is 20-25, if it is only 51, that's not that impressive for Republicans. And the only reason
I'd be careful there, because it starts with 2020, which is impressive. To lose.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The only condition you gave me for those moderate predictions is that it began essentially in 2020.
Right. I'd say I think that's a fair characterization as long as you put 2020 in there. I'd say this: we are giving away some seats. We have a candidate in Western Michigan, in Michigan 3, who didn't live in the district, isn't from the district, got Trump's endorsement because he was running against an incumbent Republican who had voted for Trump's impeachment, and he's been struggling ever since. We got a guy in a newly configured district in northern Ohio, the 11th, which ought to be good for us. He got Trump's endorsement because this guy, J.R. Majewski, had put a lavish display in his very large front yard for Trump in 2020. But he has no record in public service and turns out to be a deeply flawed candidate. Claimed to be a combat veteran. Turned out he was in Afghanistan and Iraq. Turned out he was an airplane loader for the Air Force in Qatar for a couple of months, and said I got reduced in rank because I got involved in a fight in the dormitory. Well, it turned out he was caught driving drunk on an Air Force base after 9/11, driving a big truck. And so, the NRCC has withdrawn support. So we've got a number of people like that that are going to keep us in the House from getting where we should be. Same in the Senate. If we had, Doug Ducey, the very popular governor of Arizona, running as a Republican nominee, the race would be over. We'd be locking that up.
Well, I'm curious where your modesty extends then. Do you think Blake Masters will lose in Arizona?
I don't know if he will, but I do know Doug Ducey would be winning easily, and there are very few polls that show, I have one or two polls that show Master tied or a point up, lots of polls showing him behind. The only reasons that he's got a good shot, he got a shot at winning, is that Carrie Lake, the Republican candidate for governor, is running against a terrible candidate. And Lake has an incredible ability to she's a great communicator. And so she may win by enough to drag him in. And then the other thing that has been helping him is, I'm just shocked at Mark Kelly's race. Here's a guy who had a mountain of cash, and he had an open field until August when the Republicans made their nominee. He could have been spending money and doing things in 2021 and 22 to say, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a quirky maverick when on issues that matter to this state. And instead, he just ran the same set of ads, which are he was an astronaut, he served in the military, his wife was Gabby Giffords, he's a Democrat, he was an astronaut, he served in the Air Force, his wife is Gabby Giffords. And then in the first debate, he finally, after 2 years of silence, 2 months before the election, less than 2 months before the election, says the border's a crisis. Well, where were you? Why weren't you saying and doing things about that earlier? So you could have depicted yourself as, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but you as an independent or a moderate Republican can vote for me because I'm going to stand up for Arizona on the issue of the border and water and a couple of other things that distinguish me from being a sort of run-of-the-mill, Biden Democrat.
I only have a few minutes left with you, so I want to define your modesty. You just described Arizona as probably one of the places where you feel somewhat insecure in gaining one of those senatorial seats. We'll stay on the Senate.
Yeah.
Where are your other ones? Georgia, Pennsylvania?
Well, I'm feeling better about Pennsylvania, but but just staying on what I'm talking about here, which is races that where we've been behind. I mean, in Georgia, there are polls showing us ahead, and lots of polls showing us tied. Similarly, the movement in the polls in Pennsylvania has been good. Our candidate Oz has been behind, but moving up, and then now he's starting to appear ahead in a couple of polls. Take a look at New Hampshire, where the Democrats came in and spent several $1 million in the primary. First of all, Chris Sununu, the very popular governor, if he ran, it would be like Doug Ducey. We'd be saying that race is over. He decided again because Trump had indicated that he was not favorable towards him as he was not favorable towards Ducey. So he didn't run. But there was another candidate, the president of the Senate, and Trump stayed out did not make a formal endorsement, but the Democrats spent $3 to $5 million attacking Chuck Norris, the Senate president, in order to keep him from winning. And then Trump came out and said of the other candidate, Don Bolduc, he says strong things, and I like people who say strong things. Well, Bolduc has, been struggling. He's not a good fundraiser, not comfortable talking to independents, sort of beats the table all the time, and but we could pull that one off because we got a terrible Democrat. Hassan ran on abortion for the last 6 months. That's all the ads were about. And then we get down to the end, and people in New Hampshire are saying, hey, Maggie, I'm concerned about inflation in the economy. I may vote for that other guy because you aren't talking about my issues.
Well, we'll leave it at this as we go apart. We started talking about Donald Trump and president, and we'll end it talking about Donald Trump and his effect on the midterms. You've put, not as your debate opponent, nor your ideological opponent, but as the person sitting here listening to you, put me in a position where I can't prove a negative. If the Trump candidates like Masters or Baldock win, your position seems to be, well, we would have won bigger. And I'll never be able to refute that.
Yeah. And look, we would have, because we'll know that because Chris Sununu's on the ballot in New Hampshire. We'll see how big he wins. Same thing in Ohio. J.D. Vance is going to win after the group that I'm connected with, Senate Leadership Fund, spent $35 million on his behalf. But take a look at the more traditional Republican on the ballot, Mike DeWine, and see how big he wins. And so, if we'd had better candidates in some places, we would not be having to spend money in safe Republican areas, and we'd be picking up some more House seats.
All right. And then who's presidential candidate in 2024?
Damned if I know.
All right, Carl. All right. That was a really fun conversation. I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
Juan Williams, I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
My pleasure. So I've seen you in so many places, not only Fox News Channel, but around the whole media universe, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Will.
Yeah, I'm happy to see you in person. We've been on television a few times together, but never sat down man-to-man in person. So I'm glad to do so. Let's start. We're going to talk about midterm elections today. We're one day out from the midterms, and I want to get your sense of where things are, where they're going, and what the lessons will be coming out of these midterms. So in order to set the stage, why don't you tell me first what you think is going to happen?
Well, I think what I'm going to tell you is not unique to me. I think it's based on polling. It's based on Fox News polling. And I think what's clear is that Republicans are likely to take the House majority and that we're on a knife's edge with regard to the Senate. Now, at the moment, most of the prognosticators seem to be leaning towards Republican momentum. I do break from that consensus in that when I look at Pennsylvania, I think Democrats are in pretty good shape. When I look at Georgia, I think they have the better candidate, and it may end up in a runoff, but I don't see it anything more than that. And then when we get to Arizona, again, I think Democrats are in pretty good shape. So to me, it looks like, it's a 50-50 deal, but I still would give a slight edge to the Democrats.
A slight edge to the Democrats. If that's the case, Juan, if on Wednesday morning we wake up, Republicans have taken control of the House, and we're looking at some type of tight margin in the Senate, 51-49, either way, 50-50. If that's the case, I'm going to ask you to speak for yourself, but also what you imagine will be the position of the Democratic Party. What, if anything, will be the lesson?
Well, there's already a big lesson. Obviously, let's just start with the historical lesson, which is that in midterms, the party in power gets punished. That's the example, I think, in only three of the last 40 midterm elections since the Civil War has the party in power picked up seats. And, the big one that everyone remembers is 2002, after 9/11 occurred in this country, and everyone kind of rallied around the flag and rallied around George W. Bush. But Obama lost seats in the midterm in a big way. So did Donald Trump. So what you see is that's predictable if that's one lesson you're talking about, Will. The next lesson is this. What about for this president at this time in this election? What's the lesson for Joe Biden? Well, Joe Biden's numbers are not great. He's way underwater in terms of his approval rating. But I think that the lesson will be, you know what? We got a lot done in the first 2 years. I think with a very narrow margin, he had a really extraordinary level of success in terms of passing things from COVID relief to infrastructure, and did that on a bipartisan basis. So we can't ignore that. And then, of course, the work with the prescription drugs, climate change that came out of that so-called Inflation Reduction Act. So he can feel good about that. He will realize that the lesson is that for many Americans, the current concern over inflation and the connection that people have drawn to his spending is a painful one, because the Democrats and the Biden administration do not see that connection. They know that there was going to be some inflation, but they thought it was a necessary risk given the pandemic. The lesson will be your legislative agenda for now is done. And what comes next is you have to, if they lose the Senate, you also have lost the ability to put judges in place. And you have lost the ability now to even negotiate, because given the likely strength of a Freedom Caucus, if this really is a red wave, they're not going to negotiate with a Joe Biden. So he's really then moving on to foreign policy. If he keeps the Senate, obviously, he can do something about judges. But he's really moving on to foreign policy and dealing with China, dealing with the Russian incursion into Ukraine, and, potentially trying to suggest that there is need for innovation in terms of how America deals with everything from energy to climate change. But it's a different agenda. It's a lesson learned in terms of maybe overreach.
So if the biggest takeaway, and listening to everything you laid out there, I think very, not just astutely, but most likely, in my estimation, accurately as well. If the takeaway, I'm going to use that word specifically, if the takeaway on Wednesday morning is something that now I've heard from both you and Karl Rove, that this follows historical pattern, then I don't believe there will be a lesson learned. And when I say lesson learned, what I mean by that is, what will be the message, what will be the focus, what will be the issues of Democrats and the Democratic Party moving forward, and most specifically into 2024. If the takeaway is, well, we just followed historical patterns, there won't be a lesson. If, on the other hand, someone says, as you pointed out, maybe talking about threats to democracy, maybe talking about, gender identity, whatever it may be, when Americans are facing historical inflation, isn't the right idea, then you might see a repositioning of the Democratic Party's focus. But I am skeptical, because I listened to Karl, I listened to you, and I do believe that Democrats, not unanimously, but far and wide, have adopted for example, some of the issues I just laid out as central to who they are. So I guess what I'm wondering is, as we move into 2024, do Democrats focus somewhere else? Joe Biden may focus across the globe. He may focus at foreign policy, but Democrats at large, various representatives, even those that share your ideology in the media, will we step back from, woke political issues and so forth as so integral to Democrats, or will we continue on with the same path?
Let me ask, you're my host here, I'm your guest, but I want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to just go back and forth with you a little bit, because when I'm listening to you lay out that question, I think, wow, how interesting. Will doesn't mention Donald Trump. And to me, Donald Trump is like the dominant political figure of this time. You know, it doesn't matter win or lose, he continues to dominate the conversation. But when you talk about Democratic perspective, it's as if you're saying, Democrats, you know, maybe you should have learned a lesson, and maybe you'll get your hand spanked in these midterms, and then you will be forced to acknowledge, hey, you're too woke. Like President Obama said, you know, you might make people feel a little uncomfortable if they say the wrong thing or whatever. But I don't think that's the dominant lesson. I think the dominant lesson coming out of, you know, the 2016 election, for example, was, oh my God, he, Donald Trump, really got elected. Oh my God, right? And oh my God, look at his tweets. And oh my God, look at the things that he says and does. And, you know, and we can't believe what's going on in the world. And then that spurred them to a big turnout. And I think the victory in 2020. And then it was, oh my God, there are election deniers out there. Oh my God, people believe this. Oh my God, 70% of the Republican Party believes this. Can you believe this? You know, it's like that. And then you come from there to the point where you say, you know what? We are in a moment where democracy could be threatened, because people who don't believe in elections will then say, it doesn't matter what the votes show. Here's what we think should have happened, and we control the offices of Secretary of State or, you know, the local election counter.
Now, I want to have that conversation as well, and I want to answer your question directly. But before I do, let me ask you one so that we can move productively in this conversation. It's clearly a line, and I'm not going to say it's just a line, but it's clearly in your mind, and it's in President Obama's mind, in Joe Biden's mind, in the mind of the Democratic voter, threat to democracy. Yeah. Would you define threat to democracy?
Sure, that you no longer believe in fair elections of the people, by the people, for the people.
So why is it not a threat to democracy? And I know this is probably going to sound like a partisan talking point, but we're going to have a conversation where we try to arrive at some level of understanding. Why is it not a threat to democracy when Hillary Clinton didn't accept the results? She may have formally conceded, but she did certainly go on to say that the election of 2016 was illegitimate. Why is it not a threat to democracy when that's done in 2016, or when Stacey Abrams does it in the state of Georgia? Why is threat to democracy exclusively something that's attached to the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that question on several levels, again, encouraging us to go back and forth. But the first thing is the magnitude. I mean, clearly, as you point out, Hillary Clinton conceded that she lost, but she was concerned about Russian interference, something that, you know, the U.S. bipartisan U.S. Senate has said there was Russian interference in the 2016 election. Stacey Abrams, I think, was saying that Brian Kemp, who's now the governor of Georgia, was Secretary of State when they ran against each other, and from her perspective was engaged in closing polling places in areas where she was likely to get good voter turnout. So I think that, you know, it's like a whataboutism that comes from the Republican Party, where they say, well, what about Stacey Abrams? What about this with Hillary? Or but you know, the biggest one to me would be Al Gore in 2000 by a nail's thin as a nail margin, loses, and he concedes and everything goes on. But here we have a moment where Donald Trump not only refuses, but Donald Trump literally tries to overturn with an insurrection, Will.
You know, that word, and I want to make this conversation as productive as possible. I truly come at this conversation in good spirit. Insurrection is the buzzword of the time. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that when I hear you distinguish those other election denials from the Donald Trump January 6th election denial, I hear, well, reasons. You know, that's what you amount to. And I think the only distinguishing factor is the party who is questioning the election. I mean, you gave me something about Stacey Abrams and you gave me something about Hillary Clinton.
I think
but we went on a 4 year. It's not a contest except
context.
See, now we went on 4 years of Hillary Clinton questioning that relationship. I mean,
No,
that
it
election.
wasn't.
Today, she will still say it's illegitimate.
Wait a
Today,
minute,
she would
but
say
there's
2016 was
no
illegitimate.
question that a bipartisan United States Senate, there's no question that Robert Mueller and his probe all said there was Russian interference.
Russian interference could mean playing in social media. Russian interference.
That's what it's exactly.
Yeah, well, that is not manipulating. The suggestion is that Donald Trump is not the rightful president of the United States of America. If you call him illegitimate, it's not that there's a bot on Twitter that might have influenced people. The suggestion is that somehow the election was rigged.
No, I don't think so at all. I think it's exactly what I said to you, that Russia foisted a boatload of misinformation, made efforts because they favored Trump's election. Okay, but you know what? In the spirit of actually hearing each other, I just want to be clear that among the Democrats, I don't think that there's many people who would go beyond what I'm saying to you and say, oh yeah, the actual vote count was fraudulent and actually machines were manipulated and people were stacked and there was vote harvesting. But 70% of Republicans believe that in the 2020 election.
All right, so I asked you to define threat to democracy, and that was a parenthetical to you asking me, Will, when you laid out the lessons to be learned by Democrats, you didn't mention Donald Trump. And I think we agree in our disagreement. I think that you and your party and your political party candidates and their message are entirely too fixated on the character of Donald Trump. So, Juan, you know this. I joined Fox. It's been 2 years now that I've joined Fox. And before that, I was at ESPN and in sports media for 5 years. Before that, I was in politics and I was over at CNN. I think as I watch from the outside and then from the inside, that it's stunning to me how much politics became the character drama, and that the coverage for 7 to 8 years was about a character. The reality show character. It was about Donald Trump. Right. And my lesson as I look at this is in 2022, without the character of Donald Trump in the play, you have the actual issues that have affected the American people and been lying underneath the surface, uncovered and unaddressed by politicians for 7 to 8 years. And what we're seeing in 2022 should be a readjustment for Democrats to say, well, wow, we really focused on woke issues or whatever it may be, or Donald Trump entirely too much. And we need to begin to start addressing the issues that actually affect the American people.
Well, this cycle, I think, has gone like a roller coaster, Will. And the roller coaster began with the historical pattern saying party in power is going to get punished. That's just the pattern of midterms. But then the roller coaster took a swing when we had the Dobbs decision on abortion, and suddenly Democrats were like, whoa, wait a second, look at this, especially look at women voters, suburban white women voters, and they've had a strong negative reaction to this decision. And then we took another swing, I guess, sort of late August or September, when people said, but look at inflation and look at the economic numbers, and then there were lots of, Republican hype, in my opinion, about crime and immigration, and this and that. And suddenly people are like, oh, well, I don't know. And so here we are, as you point out, a day before the election, and things are on a razor's edge. Now, to my mind, if you said to me, well, what lesson? I would say it's a lesson about maybe counting your eggs too early and not understanding that, you know what, you have to have effective messaging that would go with that. Now, you said, well, maybe the Democrats focus too much on this character, Donald Trump. But I don't think you understand that from the Democrats' point of view, he is a threat because of the election denialism, to the very idea that anybody but those who are his loyalists could ever win or ever exercise voice.
But do you think, in all seriousness and sincerity, Juan, don't you think that antipathy for Donald Trump from Democrats, from the left, existed before January 6th?
Yeah, that's why they voted him out.
The point being that the fixation with Donald Trump is not tied to January 6th. It's not tied to election denial. It's not tied to 2020. The fixation of Donald Trump with Donald Trump from the left has been in place. I mean, one could say since what? You could even argue since the famous White House press corps dinner with Barack Obama and Donald Trump. He's been the central character. Look, you and I are having a friendly conversation. He's been the hobgoblin of the left's mind for a long time now, and it didn't start on January 6th. It's probably been almost a decade, if not roughly 8 years, that the fixation has been on the character, Donald Trump.
Well, he is a character. We can agree on that. But I would say it goes back even farther. I would say when, he used to come on Fox and Friends, and he went on about the birther thing with Obama and picked up on Tea Party antipathy to Obama. And people felt, wow, this is really wild. You would suggest that, the first African-American president is not really an American? Wow, that's harmful. That's corrosive, and so it's racially divisive, but also politically polarizing. That's difficult stuff. So I take your point. He's a hobgoblin going back that far. So you say to me, oh, so it's not about election denialism. And I say to you, but, Will, when you see a guy not only continue down a path, but maybe exacerbate his behavior pattern.
Do you really think, by the way, threat to democracy, you think, I mean, there's some Democrats that have made the argument that coming out of this midterms, the democracy could be over. You think, I don't know what, if Donald Trump wins the presidency again, how is democracy end in your estimation?
How does democracy end?
In America. I mean, the projection is that it ends soon. Look, some on the left saying if Democrats lose in the midterms, it's the end of democracy.
Well, if you have people who don't revere, who don't honor elections and election results, then you don't have democracy. Then you have, I don't know what you have, but it's, you would be some kind of autocracy, leadership by one man and his will and his fiat, but not the will of the people.
No, and I'm genuinely interested. So let's put flesh on those bones.
Right. So
you're saying Blake Masters gets elected in Arizona, J.D. Vance in Ohio. Then the next time there's a question about who won an election or people in Congress, they'll have the side of a guy. Maybe it's Trump himself in 2024. They'll have the side of the guy who wants to set aside the democratic process. Right. Is that how you define a threat to democracy in the midterms of 2022?
Well, what we've seen is violent threats against election officials, Secretary of States nationwide.
That's a bipartisan problem.
That's it. You can't threaten. I don't know how it's bipartisan.
Supreme Court justices?
No, I said election officials. In other words, Secretary of State, people who do the counting, who really stand up for the integrity of the election process. Those people are being threatened, and it's threats coming from the Trump people.
But, I mean, this is going to be not unlike our conversation about election denial. And it's not a whataboutism. It's like, okay, Brett Kavanaugh just had his life threatened. There was a guy arrested for trying to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. So, I mean, Steve Scalise was shot, political violence is a problem that has a bipartisan origins. So when you focus exclusively on someone or a threat of violence on one side, it to me, it comes off as though you're selected to the point of partisanship.
No, I think that what you're doing is ignoring the fact that by all data, 80% plus of all this violence and the threats originate on the right.
I'm not familiar with that data.
Yeah. So it's, to me...
Well, that didn't mean I conceded to your point. It means I'm not familiar with that data.
I'm not trying to win. I just want to have a conversation with a friend here. And it's a friend who has a different political orientation. I agree. But I think that, we both work here and we respect each other. And I just wanted to be clear. To me, it's, people are extremists of all shapes, sizes, and distinctions, and religions, and colors, and everything else. But on the whole, these threats have been coming from the right. And that's why I cited that to you. So I don't see it as equivalent. Mm. And I think I feel threatened. It's like, when we think about something like the Paul Pelosi attack, mm-hmm. I find it troubling, very troubling, that on the right, there would be all these conspiracy theories and kind of, what would I call static? Instead of saying, you know what, that's wrong. That's just wrong. We should not have engaged in kind of ugly rumors and attacks on this man's character. The man, 80-plus-year-old man just got hit in the head with a hammer. What the hell is wrong?
I just had an explosive conversation with Geraldo Rivera about this exact issue yesterday, and I don't want to fall down that rabbit hole. I will say I think that it should be condemnable that anyone would draw conclusions unsupported by the evidence. I always try to have my affirmative conclusions supported by the facts at hand. I think it is important to point out that there was false information, bad facts in the beginning of that story, as put out by the San Francisco law enforcement and, by the way, mainstream media. For example, and this is not to excuse the conclusions that are drawn ahead of the facts, but to contextualize, in your words, whether or not there was a third person present. That was reported by Politico, but that was reported by Politico and NBC. I know that.
So we know that
but
now.
I'm telling
so
you, if you
fall the time to say, you know what, boy, that was horrible what we did.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I think that all sides of that, including those that got it wrong. If you give people false information, you can't then indict them for the conclusions off your false information. So you give people the false data at first, and then they get it wrong. And I'm not excusing them for getting it wrong, but you have to say, I see how they got it wrong.
No, you could say.
And also, I have a problem also drawing it larger. I have a problem with President Biden going, you see what happened to Paul Pelosi? That's because of mega, MAGA, ultra Donald Trump supporters.
Well, I think that, again, what we know from the facts and from the defense of the man who perpetrated this horrible crime is that he's going to say that, you know what, he was consuming extremist material online that is in line with the kind of extremists we're seeing in the Republican Party. But you know what? I agree. I feel like, somehow you don't share this point of view. I don't understand your point of view. I'm listening. Like the Politico thing, I think, okay, if Politico got something wrong, Politico got something wrong. But that was not the general perception or reporting on this topic. What?
That there was a third individual present in the beginning?
No.
Yeah.
Nobody else. You said Politico reported this.
NBC as well?
No, NBC later, as I understand it, had a piece where they were talking about, we don't know what happened in the first 30 minutes, and then they pulled it because, again, they said
they made
reporting is flawed.
They did make affirmative statements.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back to the midterms, okay? You are an astute political observer. You're going to be covering the midterms for Fox. So I don't think you're actually much further away from where Karl Rove's predictions exist. I think he thinks Republicans will pick 20 to 25 seats up in the House, and I think he thinks they'll end up at 51 seats in the Senate. You might be a little more optimistic for Democrats.
Right, but that's in the same range.
Where? Let's stay with the Senate. Where do you think you're strongest in
margin of error is what I was saying about my agreement with Karl.
Yeah. Where though? Do you think Democrats? Let's go for a couple that are in the toss-up.
The four in the toss-up would be Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada.
And what do you think will happen in those four?
So I think Pennsylvania is Fetterman, right? I think Georgia is Warnock, but I'm not sure about 50%. And again, these are thin margins, Will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then in Arizona, I think Kelly. But again, the point I think that is coming from Republicans at this moment is we've seen an uptick in Republican performance over the last few weeks. I'm not sure about that, but I will say there's no question that in the months of September and October, we saw an uptick. I think recently we're not sure, but you saw Republican vote totals surge in that period.
Mm-hmm. And then in Nevada?
In Nevada, boy, I think that right now you'd have to say Laxalt has the slight edge, but again, within the margin of error.
So of those, you feel most confident in Fetterman in Pennsylvania? It sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, it's just really stunning. I mean, what does that say about Dr. Mehmet Oz if he loses to John Fetterman? Like, just you and me sitting here.
Right.
Your political opponent suffers a stroke and simply cannot not communicate well, and you lose. What does that say about Dr. Oz?
Well, I don't know him, but I will say this, that if you look at public perception of him in terms of what people think of him, it's very negative. Now, I don't know why, but that's the reality. So the other part of it is, Fetterman's campaign has made it clear this guy hasn't spent most of his life in Pennsylvania, and he has no political experience. So he's not.
Is it all about Oz, by the way? Do you think Pennsylvania is all about Oz, meaning a rejection or an acceptance of Oz?
Well,
I mean, meaning versus somebody affirmatively embracing and wrapping their arms around Fetterman. I mean, obviously Fetterman is, look, Juan, not a strong candidate. That's kind of an objective observation.
He was.
Right. Well,
remember,
I don't get the hoodie thing. I don't get all of it. Maybe that's a subjective thing.
It's subjective because remember, he beat Conor Lamb.
Which, do you think he should have pulled out and let Conor Lamb move forward as the Democratic
I think
nominee?
Some people do think that, but I'm just coming back to what you were saying about this character that you don't like.
I mean,
the hoodie character and the kind of big guy with the tattoos and all.
I mean, Juan. I mean, come on, like
right. Well,
this isn't just a will thing. You don't have a lot of senatorial candidates out there looking like John Fetterman.
No, but we live in a populist era, don't we?
That's fair, yeah, and I think that's what he's doing.
I think that's what it is. I think that,
but I don't think anybody's gone. You know what? I love that Carhartt hoodie. I think that you could be right that it's like I don't like Dr. Oz. I think it's
no.
I think Pennsylvania is about Oz. It's not about Fetterman.
Well, then it's about Trump.
No, I don't think so.
You think that Oz would be the nominee without Donald Trump? I don't. I think Trump pushed Oz into that position as a fellow celebrity that he knows and feels comfortable with. Same thing in
I have
Georgia.
some perspective on this where, look, I've had a debate with Oz on air. I don't think Oz fits neatly into whatever the new right may be or whatever Trumpism may be, setting aside political elections. You know what I mean? I know he got Trump's endorsement.
Right.
But
I think he was pushed by Trump. He's not a McConnell guy. I'm not sure he's a Rick Scott guy. He's a Trump guy.
I don't know what kind of senator he'd be. I don't know that he'd be a Trump guy as senator. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. Why do you think that?
I have a lot of... I don't think his history suggests that he's always held the beliefs that he says he holds today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Juan Williams. Hey, I'll say it to you again when the microphone's off. I would really love to have you on again. And you know what I'd like to do is take some places where we have disagreement and really hone them. Because when you have a conversation around disagreement, I just think sometimes it's much more productive. Not that there was anything wrong with this when we both go into like, hey, let's have a conversation about X.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you have two people that always disagree, you can spin off. But the point is, I do want to have more conversations with someone who has a good-spirited nature of disagreement.
Well, here's the thing. I just think there are not enough conversations between people in this polarized political environment who have different points of view.
I agree.
It's oftentimes the case that people then are demonized. Oh, that person's on the wrong side. I can't talk to them. I don't like them. They shouldn't go out with my daughter. Gee whiz, shut up. I mean, why can't Will and Juan have a conversation? Especially since Will, I don't know if those of you who are watching, I don't know how many people watch the Will Cain podcast.
That's going to be up to you on this one.
But I
click on Juan Williams.
But I love the socks. The socks are We the People socks for those of you who might be able to see them. And I wrote a book called We the People, so I was thinking, gee, Will, thank you.
All right, Juan, it's been fun. Thank you.
My pleasure, man. Thanks.
Colin, I'm so glad to have you with me today here on the Will Cain podcast. We're one day out. And everyone is expecting a big red wave in the midterm election. Whether or not that's true, when will we know it's true? If you're looking at one state on Tuesday night to come in that gives you some indication of where we're headed as a country, what would be that state?
Well, Will, I think it is going to be a big red wave, and I think the cycle is ending as it started with a fairly large tsunami about to hit the shore. In terms of where we should be looking, I keep my eye on the Northeast since they come in first. They have they're typically blue parts of the country. And if Republicans are picking up wins, I'm especially watching Rhode Island, too. Alan Fung is the guy who's been on the radar, folks. He came on late, came on strong. He's just a great guy. He's ran a really good race, and he's really poised to turn some heads up there. In a part of the country, frankly, Republicans have no business competing. And if Democrats are ceding ground in deep blue Rhode Island, in a seat that President Biden won by 14 points 2 years ago, buckle up because they're going to be in for a long, long night.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you're not just focused on the ones that are defined as toss-ups right now, but ones that in the past would have been reliably blue, maybe now lean blue. So do you think Republicans are going to make big gains in those states that were expected to remain in Democrat control, meaning New Hampshire, Oregon, Washington? Are we looking at beyond Arizona and Nevada and seeing Republican wins in some of those states?
Yeah, look, all the horses are coming down the finish line right now. There's 24 hours to go until we start getting some of this information for us. I do think we're going to have some folks get across the finish line who people did not expect to do so. And then, of course, there's always one who doesn't, and there's one who doesn't quite make it. When the wave hits, it hits hard, and it washes a lot of people up on shore, and there's some folks inevitably who don't quite get there. But everything is trending in the absolute right direction. And just look 2 days ago at President Biden and Senator Manchin going back and forth about President Biden, whether he's going to put coal out of business. That is just the absolute last wrong thing, to have your party at each other's throats on such an important issue with so little time to go. And it kind of personifies everything that's going on in the Democratic Party right now. And I look at a state like Pennsylvania, which is going to go down to the wire. Senator Pat Toomey won that seat in 2010 by 80,000 votes. Fetterman and Dr. Oz back and forth. It'll be a close race. But you've got 500,000 oil and gas workers who the last weekend going into the election hear the leader of the Democratic Party say, we're going to put you all out of business. That is not what John Fetterman needed. That's not what Democrats anywhere needed to hear. And we should believe them, because this is something that President Biden has been very consistent on from day one and has frankly done, sadly, in a very effective job at, which is destroying America's homemade oil and gas industry.
Yeah, it's shocking how not only willing Democratic politicians have been, but how obstinate they've been in embracing some really unpopular concepts, whether or not that be denying the existence of crime or embracing gender identity as a fighting issue, or shutting down coal plants. And it makes me think about this. All politics, as the saying goes, is local. And so as we go state to state, different issues are the animating number one priority for voters. If it's in New York, it's crime. If it's in Texas, it's immigration. When you look at some of those states that you're predicting or watching that have been blue that could go red in New England, what is the number one issue for those voters?
Well, in New York, this Lee Zeldin, Kathy Hochul race that's come online so late in the game, that is crime. And if it were a Democratic candidate who had a madman outside his or her home while their daughters were home doing their homework, this would be a far bigger deal. We've kind of all forgotten the fact that this guy was almost assassinated by a lunatic on the campaign trail, and the media is just willing to look the other way. So crime is what's animating people in New York City and New York State, and that's another one. Look, if we have Governor-elect Lee Zeldin in 2 days, hold on to your hats, because that's one that never, frankly, should have come online, but it has. And then in other parts of the Northeast, it's getting really cold up there. And the home heating costs, they're real. And you've got governors in Pennsylvania and New York who refuse to allow pipelines through their states. And as a result, the entire northeastern part of the country is reliant on their energy sources from other places when they could be getting it from right here at home.
All right, Colin, then let's pick it up. I hope you'll make some predictions. Let's go through a couple of states, and you tell me what you think is going to happen. You just talked about New York. How do you think it will go there in the governor's race between Kathy Hochul and Lee Zeldin?
That's a nail-biter. And like I said, there's no business, a Republican has no business competing in the state of New York, given the party registration numbers that favor the Democrats and everything else that's going on in their favor. But I think it is possible you see a governor-elect Lee Zeldin there in a couple of days. We already talked about Rhode Island, too. Alan Fung, going to be a great next member of Congress there. And then let's go down to Pennsylvania. There's a couple of really bellwether races there. A guy named Jim Bognett running in Pennsylvania 8 against Matt Cartwright, a Democrat incumbent who's held on for many cycles. They represent Scranton, which is purported to be Joe Biden's hometown. That'd be a real embarrassment for the president to lose his quote-unquote home district. And I think that's one you could see flipping. Bognett's run a really strong race and has just held Cartwright to account for all of the things the Biden administration has done these last couple years. And then of all the big Senate races, well, it's very possible that all of them get across the finish line, from Arizona to Nevada to Georgia to New Hampshire. People want to talk about Washington State. That's really blue. I'll tell you this. If Senator Patty Murray, the Democrat incumbent out there, loses, then that'll be the high point of red tsunami hitting the shore.
In Washington. Let's stay on Senator then. Let's stay on the senatorial races. Did you make a prediction? I might have missed it in that answer. Did you make a prediction on how you thought Pennsylvania would go?
I think Dr. Oz will pull it out, and here's why. He's been behind the whole time, and I'm not a proponent that debates generally matter. I think most voters and people have a lot other to do with their time, especially when you've got the Phillies in the World Series and you've got a lot of great sports going on in the state. But that also created an opportunity because that debate was so catastrophic for John Fetterman. And there's no way that anybody watching that could come away from that and say, yeah, that's my guy who I think should be the next senator. But even if they didn't watch that debate, they've had now 2 weeks of ads being piped into their television sets, and you got a rapt audience. The World Series might be over now, but there was 6 games of a lot of advertising to get just put in front of people's faces. And even if you do believe the guy somehow can, I've heard Democrats say, well, senators don't really do that much, so it doesn't really matter what his state is. And I guess that might be true, but I'm not sure it's really a compelling argument to a lot of folks. And his answer on fracking, especially in a state like that, is just so disqualifying. Again, compounded by President Biden's statement on Friday that he wanted to put the entire industry out of business, talking about coal workers.
Let's stay in the Northeast. What about in New Hampshire for senator?
Yeah, Don Bolduc run a really strong campaign. Senator Maggie Hassan is someone who's just been an underwhelming presence. She's someone who has voted with the party nearly 100% of the time. She won by 1,000 votes last time in a much better political climate. So I think she's someone that, if she ever wanted to win a re-election, was going to need to separate herself from the party. She didn't do that. And so I think that one will flip. I think It's possible that every single race we're talking about flips. All those Republican horses get across the finish line, and then we'll have to see what happens in Washington State.
Okay, so I don't have to keep bouncing across the map. You're saying New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. I assume you also mean Ohio, Arizona, Nevada, all senatorial seats going red.
And over the summer, I was one of those nervous Republicans who was saying, I'm not sure we're going to get there. I thought Senator McConnell made some good points about candidate quality, and I thought some of the early Democrat money you saw being spent was propelling their candidates up. But as summer turned to fall and these economic disasters started piling up, every which way you looked, from interest rates to energy prices, just the jobs report on Friday was not what it needed to be. There's just no reason right now that any open-minded, persuadable voter is going to say, yeah, life's better now than it was 2 years ago. I'm going to keep the guys in charge here for another 2 years. And that's really what this all comes down to, is change versus status quo. And unfortunately for America, things aren't going great right now. And it's very easy to, if you're a change agent, to offer a different point of view.
All right, Colin, then let's put this into numbers. I hear you. It's a red wave that could sweep all the way across the country to the doorstep of Washington, which you're saying, as I'm gathering through our conversation, is sort of the Alamo for Democrats. It's the last stand on holding on to an achievable, winnable seat. So let's put numbers on it. In the House, do you have a prediction on how many seats will go Republican?
I would say between 25 and 28 in the House. And I think the final Senate breakdown is 53-47. It's possible in Georgia that Herschel Walker has to go to a runoff. It's possible he gets there over the finish line. But either way, I think he gets there in the end.
53. So 53 is New Hampshire. It is Ohio. It is Pennsylvania. It's Georgia. It's Nevada. It's Arizona.
That's right.
All right. And it's short of Washington then. 54 requires Washington to flip?
That's right. Basically, the Republicans will hold all the seats they currently hold. That means they got to hold Florida, which they will, hold North Carolina, which they will. There was talk that both of those races could have come online earlier in the fall. The climate is just too bad right now for the Democrats to do so. They wanted to make Chuck Grassley's Iowa race into some sort of close contest. I saw a poll just this morning that had him up 11 points there, so that one's come off the map. Ohio, J.D. Vance has had his challenges, no doubt. Tim Ryan has run a stronger campaign than many other Democrats. But again, this is a state that Trump won by 8 points. It's just too red for a Democrat to flip in this kind of climate. And then you just flip all those seats we talked about, and there you go. And look, I worked for Scott Brown in 2010 when he was a Republican running in Massachusetts, of all places, one of the bluest states on the country, if not the bluest. And he beat Martha Coakley by 5 points in that special election because people were so mad, people were so frustrated, and they saw one party as the status quo and one party as the change. It isn't that complicated. And if candidates are able to offer that just offer the two compelling points of view, voters are smarter than sometimes candidates give them credit for. And usually it's the candidates with the simplest, cleanest, crispest message are the ones that win.
All right, there you go. That is the definition of a red wave. Colin, thank you for defining the red wave for us today on the Will Cain Podcast.
Hey, thank you, Will.
All right, awesome. So what are we sitting at, by the way? 212 today? Is it 212 for Republicans in Congress? To what?
Right now?
Yeah. Right now?
They're 4 short right now.
So you predicted 25. I was trying to put the number, what the total number is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Colin, thank you. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.